Gormaga Cahirlock, and I want to first of all start by saying that I want to acknowledge Ms Oireachtas' statement in that it's entirely correct that the internal audit procedure is what brought this to light, and the actions of the board following the internal audit is what brought it to further attention. And I appreciate that I think those measures were taken in good faith. Additionally, all the information which you provided has been provided voluntarily to us. I think actually over the last 3 weeks, via Oireachtas committees, we've established the facts in a way that hasn't cost the taxpayer additional money, that hasn't involved a significant amount of barristers, and that in some part was because of the cooperation which RTE provided and the manner in which they provide the information. So I should note that. Mr. Backhurst, I've no doubt you want to come in and talk to us about the future of broadcasting and so on. Unfortunately, that's a matter really for the media committee. Our remit is essentially around the facts and figures, and so we will have to continue to come back to the past before you can move on to the future. Can I just, perhaps Mr. Lynch's assistance, because you might be more familiar with the events at the time, could I just say, and it's to help us establish what has happened to date, would you accept that the tri-party agreement was an attempt to facilitate additional income for Mr. Tubridy as part of his overall contract negotiations?
So I wasn't involved in those early negotiations. I think if you look at Breda O'Keeffe's testimony, she talks about adding it in.
Would you accept that they were part of his overall contractual negotiations?
It appears so, yes.
Yeah. Would you accept that it was an attempt to provide additional income to him?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you accept that it's not additional independent work, but actually that it was facilitated by RTE, that RTE introduced Mr. Kelly to their sponsor, Renault, that RTE paid for the staging and the catering, and that RTE staff member was present at the events? Is that a fair?
Correct.
Yeah. Would you accept that if Renault had continued to make the payment of the €75,000, albeit it was only agreed for year one, would you accept that if Renault had continued to pay that for year 2 and 3, there is actually a likelihood that we would never have found out about this?
Correct.
Yeah. Would you accept that in making it cost neutral to the sponsor, it meant that RTE was effectively funding the tri-party agreements?
Correct.
Do you agree that the method of making it cost neutral was raising the credit note?
Correct.
Ms O'Leary said that she was aware of the tri-party agreement and that she was aware of the cost neutral nature, and that the credit note was raised on the instruction of Ms Forbes. Is that consistent with your knowledge of what has happened to date?
Correct.
Okay. Mr Collins said that he was not aware of the details of the tri-party agreement, and that he was aware there was an attempt to facilitate additional commercial arrangements, but he was not aware of the cost neutral nature. I think that's your evidence, Mr Collins. Would that be consistent, Mr Lynch, with what RTE knows and having carried out a trial of all of the information?
Yeah, I also asked Mr Collins in terms of cost neutrality, did he know that? And he said he absolutely did not. Okay.
In the documents put forward by Mr Kelly on Tuesday in an email included in the pack it was issued by RT staff members who Mr Kelly said worked by Miss O'Leary. Sorry, let me rephrase that. So there was an email which Mr Kelly delivered to us with a reference that it said, do not put any names on the invoice. And he said that that was issued by a staff member that worked with Miss O'Leary and RTE. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is that email, yeah.
And who was that person?
So I think out of respect, because in terms of Mr Kelly's testimony, Miss O'Leary's testimony, Mr Tubridy's testimony, as a result of that, not only has there been a significant breach of trust with the public, there's also been significant personal, human sort of collateral damage out of this. And I think that pulling junior members of staff who really would have no context on anything is absolutely unfair. So on that basis, I will not divulge that name.
I accept you have a duty of care to your staff, and I accept different levels of responsibility within the organisation. I would say to you that in phrasing it in a way that says do not put any names on the invoice, it shows an intent to deceive.
I would agree with that, and that instruction would have come from elsewhere.
Okay, and if that person worked for Miss O'Leary, and given that Miss O'Leary isn't here, and it was a key question I wish to ask her, it could only be assumed that if that person worked for Miss O'Leary and that person communicated information that said do not put any names on the invoice, and we've accepted that was an attempt to try and not provide the full information, that instruction came from Miss O'Leary.
So in terms of that, in terms of Miss O'Leary's evidence on the record before the House, in terms of Miss O'Leary's interview with Grant Thornton, in terms of Grant Thornton's exploration of her emails, in terms of my interactions with Miss O'Leary, for me, she has always told the truth all the way through this. She has said she processed invoices that were paying Ryan Tubridy, and that was a wrong thing to do. She has admitted that. She said to me, because I did ask her, where did the instruction come from around consultancy? She said, genuinely, Adrian, I cannot remember. And that's what's on the record. And I believe that, because I think otherwise...
But the junior member of staff that we haven't identified... and
it did not come from her.
Yes,
that's for sure.
But I would say, and I think the committee reserved the right to consider that idea of the junior level of staff, regardless of where somebody is in an organisation, they have a responsibility as part of their contract to their employer, and there's an overall responsibility to the taxpayer, regardless of how junior you are in an organisation. Yeah. And if you communicate something that says, do not put any names on an invoice, you must accept some culpability in the overall result of what happens.
Yeah, I would say to you...
or be able to apportion it to your boss.
Yeah. I think also we just need to be cognizant here of there is a duty of care to junior members of staff. Undoubtedly, if someone is providing a credit note to Renault, undoubtedly if RTE are paying for Renault events, more people know about that than Geraldine O'Leary, but they've no context to understand.
I appreciate that. Ms. Maloney, Mr. Kelly stated that the RTE solicitor referenced in the May 7th meeting was Trish Whelan. Is that correct?
Really, again, for the same reasons that Mr. Lynch has provided, it is unfair to have people's names before this committee who are not here to defend themselves. Okay. So I will answer any questions in relation to it, but I really would rather other people's names.
The difficulty for the committee is in the absence of anybody contesting Mr. Kelly's evidence, it's now the evidence before the committee that Ms. Whelan was at the May 7th meeting.
There was an RTE solicitor present at the May 7th meeting.
And at that meeting, the verbal agreement was given to underwrite the agreements?
Yes.
Okay. So an RTE solicitor was present in May 2020, May 7th, 2020, when that decision to underwrite was given?
Yes.
So the RTE legal department knew from as early as 2020 that RTE had agreed to underwrite the agreements?
Yes.
So it is not fair to say that the issue of underwriting was contested consistently throughout, because it had been agreed in the meeting, witnessed by RTE legal.
It was contested until such time as that undertaking was given by the Director General. That undertaking, and again, I'm sorry that you don't have the documents in relation to number 15, but those emails make it clear that that was resolved at that meeting as far as Noel Kelly was concerned. Yeah.
Would you, Mr. Lynch, you cite, I might allow my other colleagues follow up on that point, in regard to the underwriting, and you say it was not a final negotiation, would you accept that while it wasn't a final negotiation, as early as Ms. O'Keeffe's first email, the point was conceded by RTE in the negotiations?
So I wouldn't. I would say the following. I talked to Ms. O'Keeffe, and again, Ms. O'Keeffe is not here to give evidence.
But her written evidence is.
So just to say to you, by memory, she said absolutely there was no underwriting of this. She said there was maybe something for year one, I don't know. And I know we're dancing the head of a pin here, because from Mr. Kelly's email, it's for this contract and the next. Yeah. Was he talking about 2 years or
but
5?
Mr. Lynch, to be fair to you, Ms. O'Keeffe has decided not to be here today.
Yeah.
The only written evidence is her own words that says we can provide a side letter to underwrite this fee for the duration of the contract. That's the only evidence this committee has before us. That would appear to be contradictory to what you're saying. Yeah. It would appear to be for the entire duration, and it would appear that Ms. O'Keeffe conceded that point on behalf of RTE in the negotiations as early as that date of that email.
I think I can provide clarity on this, just because there is repeated confusion around it. There is the email of the 20th of February. After that email, Noel Kelly management send in a draft letter, which is in effect an underwriting agreement. That letter is not signed. It is never signed. Why is it not signed? It is not signed because there is pushback in respect of the underwriting of this agreement.
But Ms. Millie, that is contrary. Ms. Lee, that is contrary to the written email in red. The words of Ms. O'Keeffe, and we can't contest them here because she's not here, where she says we will underwrite the agreement.
But the reality is, it is not underwritten at that point.
No,
There's
no,
2.5 more months.
that's not my question. That's not my question. My question was, do you agree that was conceded by RTA on behalf by Ms. O'Keefe?
No, I do not agree with that.
She said she conceded in
I do not
negotiations.
agree with that.
It's not a final legal position, but it was conceded.
Well, I'm a lawyer and I tend to take legal positions. So from my perspective,
But negotiations around we concede points lots of times during negotiation.
I don't accept it was conceded at that point.
Deputy Kelly.